lab leak whistleblower. You know, the whole COVID came from a lab in China. There are holes in that story, and Dan Cohen went to investigate that on his Uncaptured Media. He says that Dr. Li Mengyan presented herself as a whistleblower who had fled China to tell the world that COVID came from a lab and was a bioweapon. Well, that story is full of holes. She had worked with American scientists many times in her career. She married a scientist who had Pentagon contracts. That's weird. Later, she accused him of being a Chinese spy. Does the Pentagon employ Chinese spies for virology research, I wonder? So, Dan, welcome back to Redacted. And maybe you can tell us how you found the story and why it matters.
Yeah, good to be with you. I have to give credit to my co-author on this story, a man named Mark Kulak of Housatonic.live, who's one of the best researchers and archivists out there. He and Jonathan Cooey, PhD of GigaOM Biological, figured this out more than a year ago. So what I did is basically take a lot of the work they did and turn it into journalistic format. So, you know, the broader public can understand the level of deception that we have been exposed to, not simply about the lab leak story and not even just about the COVID story, but about a much broader multi-generational deception about pandemics, that they're even possible. And so really this is the tip of the iceberg. And Li Mengyan appeared in July 2020 when we were all dealing with lockdowns and being separated from families and job closures and these kinds of things. And everyone is terrified of this supposedly novel virus going around. And Li Mengyan appears suddenly on Tucker Carlson's show back when he was still at Fox News, saying that this is actually a Chinese bioweapon. The Chinese government created this, released it, and then covered up human-to-human transmission, and then therefore they have to pay. They are responsible for this. In fact, so then Li Mengyan was all over the media. She went on a number of podcasts, and for years she has been considered basically a credible figure, or given credible testimony on this subject. She did tours with figures like Dr. Robert Malone, who is an advisor, a top advisor to Children's Health Defense of I think the president of which you just had on, Mary Holland, along with Dr. Richard Urso, Dr. Ryan Cole, and doing tours across the United States in churches and any kind of public forum, talking about her story being a Chinese whistleblower. And in fact, as you mentioned, Natalie, she never said in any public appearance that we were able to find that she had ever been in the United States. She made it appear as if she was a mid-level scientist at this lab in Hong Kong, and found out that from a source in the Chinese CDC that that it was a bioweapon, that COVID was a bioweapon, and that there was human-to-human transmission that was being covered up. But in fact, she was married in 2014 in Manhattan, in New York City. There's a photo in the original Fox News article on her of her wedding party, which is in like a barn in what looks like rural New York or Jersey or Pennsylvania. And unless that's a theme park, an American like country theme park in China, then it's clear that she would, I mean, it's obvious, it's documented. She was at least married here. She may have spent more significant time. She is married into one of the most prominent families in the biomedical establishment here in Washington, D.C. And she also not only has personal connections, but she worked in Hong Kong under the two scientists who were essential in creating the COVID narrative, and even going back to isolating the SARS virus in 2003, and then were again essential in not only the COVID-19, the SARS, in supposedly SARS-CoV-2, but also coming up with the countermeasures that were recommended to the World Health Organization and then many countries adopted. They also came up with they also designed the PCR diagnostic test, which the World Health Organization used, which actually did not specifically test for SARS-CoV-2, but was a pan-coronavirus test. So it would not just find SARS-CoV-2, it would be any fragment of any viral particle in anybody's nose it would pick up on. So it was not actually testing that. That was one of the ways that was the primary way that there was basically, and it's not what I believe, is what I think the evidence shows was a faked pandemic. And the lab leak narrative that Li Mengyan promoted was one side of a dialectical propaganda campaign where for years people have been arguing, did it come from nature or did it come from a lab? But this is all based on the assumption that there was a novel virus. And in fact, there's no evidence of that. And there's evidence that a pandemic was faked. And so this is the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, this is, this is the, go ahead, Clayton.
Go ahead, Dan. No, it's the tip of the iceberg. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm just.
Well, this is the tip of the iceberg in the sense that there is this deception that, everyone thinks it's lab leak now. And that is everyone thinks it came from a lab. That was relegated to the extreme right wing at the very beginning, to neocons like Tom Cotton. But in fact, this is a narrative that was brought about by Steve Bannon. We know that Steve Bannon also played a huge role in bringing President Trump to power by shaping him as kind of this conservative populist, even though Trump was a longtime Democratic Party New York State real estate mogul. And then Bannon brings in this doctor who has an obviously faked story and has omitted key aspects of it. And then the story goes from Trump quickly adopts it, Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, faux populist right-wing figures and neoconservatives who have an axe to grind with China. And Steve Bannon was on the payroll of a guy named Miles Guo, who is a fugitive billionaire from China who is dead set on overthrowing the Chinese government. He came to the United States. He ended up committing huge amounts of fraud, and he's now in prison inside the United States for defrauding millions of dollars, defrauding people out of millions of dollars, buying a yacht from which he declared the Federal Republic of China, the federal state of China, I think it's called, like a Juan Guaido style operation to replace the Chinese government in the New York harbor with the Statue of Liberty in the background. So that's where this lab leak thing originated, and then it's been slowly adopted by the mainstream. And when it was considered right-wing and racist, it slowly became mainstreamed, and it was made to feel like the subversive dissident narrative, because if you said lab leak, not only you were called racist, you could be censored, you could be kicked off of Facebook and Instagram, or your X account, your Twitter account at that time could be suspended. But that made it feel like, oh, well, maybe the establishment doesn't want us to think about that. And so it actually has, that's to me, that's clearly what they wanted us to think. And now it's the official position of the U.S. government.
I guess that free speech is under attack, but Rumble refuses to back down on this. We've always believed in empowering voices, no matter how unpopular. And now we're taking that fight to the next level when major advertisers conspired to pull their dollars. Even brands like Dunkin' Donuts turned their backs on shows like ours, claiming Rumble had a right-wing culture. But we're not here to fit a mold. We are here to defend free expression. Right now, for a limited time, you can get $10 off an annual plan using the promo code Redacted. Just visit rumble.com/premium/redacted and claim your discount code today. Just use that code Redacted. That's what I'm thinking of all of this, right? It's a brilliant cover story. It's like a brilliant sort of medical false flag event, right? I escaped China, and I'm bringing this story to you, the American people. And yeah, if people post about this on X, then your accounts, that's like the dirty thing. It's like telling teenagers, don't look in that room, don't look behind that door. What are teenagers going to do? They're going to look behind that door So it's a brilliant false flag medical story. I mean, that's the way I see it. Am I wrong?
No, that's exactly it. That's I think one of the key tools of information warfare, if we can call it that, in the modern social media era, where we think that okay, Facebook has been is censoring and Instagram is censoring and they're acting independently, but in fact we know that these organizations, well, of course Facebook and Instagram are Meta, but the different TikTok, X, we know, and before when it was Twitter, that they operate in concert. So we've been funneled to think certain ways while making us think that we are actually thinking freely. And again, all of this is predicated on the idea that a pandemic is even a biologically plausible event. And if you talk to Jonathan J. Cooey, PhD, who was a top advisor to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and was a scientist for Children's Health Defense, and was fired for criticizing Robert Malone, he will tell you he was also a huge proponent of lab leak theory at the beginning, and he realized that it was totally fictional, that it was biologically impossible. And so he's the guy to talk to about all this, who can go into much more detail. He can tell you exactly why a pandemic is not a real thing. He can give you a lot of detail on this. What I do is tend to look more at propaganda and figures like Li Mengyan. So there's a much greater agenda that, like I said at the beginning, is multi-generational, that we have to go back decades to understand of why would they want us to think there's a pandemic? What is the real reason for all of these lies? There was, of course, the unprecedented upward transfer of wealth during the COVID era. The radical transformation of society, where we now live in our smartphones. When I go to a restaurant, I order through a smartphone. Everything is through a QR code. The destruction of working class, small businesses, that market share taken up. But there are much even greater agendas than that I think maybe we should save for another time. But I guess what I would say is the fact there are key actors like Dr. Robert Malone, who know that, who were in on this, who have been placed in what is a controlled opposition of a health freedom movement. And these are the people who are advising Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And that's why when Jonathan J. Cooey told Robert F. Kennedy, hey, wait a minute, the whole basis for your book, the Wuhan cover-up, is bogus. This doesn't even make sense. He was politely shown the door. So there's an intricate web of deceptions. And I mean, there are certain people who I think I know that they are liars. Tucker Carlson was he was the first person, I think, or maybe the second person to interview Li Mengyan. I don't know what his intent was. I can't infer his intent. I would like to ask Tucker Carlson how that happened. And, the same with The Guardian and CNN, why nobody, whether the supporters of Li Mengyan or the critics of Li Mengyan, bothered to look into her background and find this publicly available information that she actually is married into one of the biggest biomedical families in the U.S. She is from the establishment. So, and if Tucker is willing to pursue that, I mean, again, the figure to interview to really get to the bottom of this is Jonathan J. Cooey. So.
Yeah, I've watched the videos that you sent, and you can find that more on Uncaptured Media. Dan is a dog with a bone over this because he's not having it. If we're gonna, argue this in a bipartisan way, lab leak, not lab leak, real or not real, it's a distraction from the pharmacratic state, I think, is where you're going with this. So thank you for bringing us this story.
Thank you, Dan. Joining us from the swamp of D.C. How hot is it there in D.C. right now? Oh my God, it's like we're dying in our studio right now. It's hot as balls.
Yeah, there was like a horrible period where it was like 98, 99 degrees and total humidity here. But for some reason, these last few days, we've been blessed with like relatively cool weather. So I'm just trying to not jinx it.
Relatively. In the dog days of summer in the Washington, D.C. swamp.
Yeah, exactly.
Dan, great to see you as always. Thank you so much. And check out Uncaptured Media, where Dan does all of his great work. Great.